The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station, JVC Broadcasting Management, or its sponsors.
Welcome to Crime and Justice Radio, where we talk all things crime, justice, mayhem, and the courts with expert insiders and legal outcasts. Good evening, Bruce Barquette. How are you?
Good evening, Ms. Leisenring. How are you?
I'm well.
So, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I was hoping we would do one another's resumes, but I'll be a personal advocate for myself. My name is Aida Leisenring. I was born in Spain. I'm a criminal defense practitioner here in New York. I grew up in Philadelphia. I went to Brown University. Instead of pursuing law, I decided to become an editor at Elle Magazine for 3 years, and that was very exciting. Headed over to law school, became a public defender for 6 years in Brooklyn, and then joined the Barquette Epstein law firm.
Best movie of your career.
That's right. And I've been there 8 or 9 years. I call them Maggie years. Your youngest was born 2 days after I started. So that's how long I've been there. One day she'll be 17, and I'll think maybe it's time for me to go.
Oh, very interesting, very interesting.
And Bruce, tell us a little about yourself.
Well, you know, I'm a former prosecutor. After I was a prosecutor, I actually studied in a Jesuit seminary to become a Catholic priest. Did that for a short time until I realized that God probably didn't give me two things to be competent at, and I was reasonably competent as a lawyer, so I opted out of the priesthood. And I've been a criminal defense attorney ever since then, and some people have said that I went from being a prosecutor to a priest to a prostitute of sorts. But I don't look at it quite that way. We, as criminal defense attorneys, defend the accused. We seek mercy and leniency for those convicted and those who are guilty. And every once in a while, more often than people are comfortable admitting, we participate in the exoneration of the innocent. And that's pretty good work if you can get it. We're going to have a great show for us tonight. Our first guest is Ray Tierney, who is the Republican and conservative nominee for district attorney in Suffolk County. We're going to talk to him in a few minutes. We have a Chauvin update to see what's going on with that trial. We're going to discuss two other incidents that relate directly to the Chauvin case. Everyone knows that the officers in Minneapolis shot and killed another African-American over the weekend, and we have that traffic stop resulted in someone's death, along with the lieutenant from the Army who was pulled over in Virginia, who was maced and dragged out of his car for apparently no reason. But we'll talk about all of those things as we move through the hour. Including, if we get to it, jail and COVID, and the recent New York Times article that talked about the heightened increase in COVID deaths as compared to the rest of the country for incarcerated inmates. Bruce, I have a question to ask you. Since we're not trying cases right now, as jury trials haven't really picked up yet, what are we doing here? I don't know. I was asking myself that question. Like, why shouldn't we be prepping a client, writing a brief, thinking about cross-examinations? But we're going to spend an hour a week going through the criminal justice system, we hope, in a slightly different way. And the reason for that, at least from my perspective, is that the criminal justice system is the flashpoint of government and citizen interaction. People say that the joke is government is here to help, but it's often true. From hospitals to roads to bridges to schools, firefighters and police, the military to protect us, the government often is actually here to help and really do provide valuable services. But when the government shows up to arrest somebody, one of the citizens, the government becomes an adversary unlike anything you can imagine. And that flashpoint, that intersection between the government and the citizen is either the cornerstone of a free society if the justice system runs well and if it's trusted by the citizens, or it is the first brick in a wall of tyranny if it's not run well or if it's not trusted. So I think talking about these issues is critical and important, and I'm looking forward to it. And I think it's critical to talk about
the brick in Tierney that you just discussed, because we have 2.3 million people incarcerated, and over half of those incarcerated are incarcerated for nonviolent crimes. And so I would say we have a second pandemic, and it's of government overreach. We are number one in the world in incarceration rates. We are literally ahead of El Salvador, Iran, which apparently is a freer country than the United States, and Rwanda.
Rwanda?
Yes, in Rwanda. We were actually there for a case, or at least a layover.
For a moment or two.
But that's another story. So I really wanted to do this show with you because I want to expose the failures in our criminal justice system. And personally, I want to obstruct this, and I know it's dramatic to say dictatorship of the criminal justice system, stop the senseless incarceration of people who are not violent or those who deserve second chances. And, I'm kind of tired of the government telling us what to do, from leashing our dogs to what we do in our own homes or what we look at on our phones. And there is so much news to talk about, and we're going to get to Dante Wright, the 20-year-old African-American male who was shot this Sunday in the afternoon during a car stop, and also the implications that has on Derek Chauvin's trial. Bruce, do you want to talk a little about that?
Well, Derek Chauvin's trial is fascinating for a number of reasons. From my perspective, the most interesting part of it is I think it represents the breaking point, or the potential breaking point, of our criminal justice system. Can this man get a fair trial? Derek Chauvin may or may not be deserving of conviction and all the condemnation he's received in the public media. He may or may not be entitled to an acquittal. But the system that it's set up as it is now, he has zero chance of getting acquitted. Because if he's acquitted, there'll be riots that'll make the Rodney King riots of the early 90s look like a New Year's Day rose parade. And that is what's interesting to me. How do we have a fair system of justice where both sides can accept the result? It should be a fair trial. The result is the result. But what we have with Derek Chauvin is there's only one fair result. And if we don't get that, there's going to be a price to pay. And I think that's a devastating blow to our system.
And today, the prosecution either has rested or is about to rest. And on the eve of the prosecution resting on this high-profile trial all eyes of the nation are watching, Dante Wright is killed, and only 10 miles away from where George Floyd died. And protest ensued, riots ensued, the National Guard was called, and as any good defense lawyer should do, the defense raised this to the judge and said he actually filed a motion to sequester the jury following the evening's police shooting in Minneapolis suburb. The judge denied the motion and said the incident was entirely different than Derek Chauvin's. But what the riots and the protest and the National Guard and the violence and the civil unrest, rightfully and not rightfully, whatever your thoughts are, did is send a message to the jurors in the Chauvin trial.
Don't you dare.
Don't you dare.
Don't you dare. And look, we're not endorsing the defense here. We're not saying Chauvin deserves to be acquitted. We're criminal defense attorneys. We've represented individuals who are police officers who were charged with excessive force. We've represented individuals who were the victims of excessive force by police, not passing judgment on the case, the merits of the case. But we have to look at this and admit that the system can't deal with a trial like this. It just can't. The trial should have been moved from Minneapolis, let a juror or a jury in some other jurisdiction render a verdict, where at least in that instance, that jury wouldn't think that their homes are going to be burned, that their community is going to be destroyed, that the riots are going to take place in their neighborhood. And that is what these jurors are confronted with. They know full well if this man is acquitted, there will be riots in their town. I tried organized crime cases, and I remember having sequestered and anonymous juries because everyone was afraid that if the jury convicted, that our clients, the organized crime figures, would bring retribution to them, harm them in some way. So the anonymous jury was there to protect the jury or jurors from the defendants on a conviction. Here, I really think we need an anonymous jury to protect the jurors in the case of an acquittal.
Is it true that the judge indicated he was going to release the name of the jurors after
the trial,
the verdict?
That was his original ruling. Whether he sticks to that or not, I don't know. But that was the original ruling. And look, it's not just the Dante Wright shooting. You also had Lieutenant Karen Nazario, whose the video cam footage of his stop was released over the weekend. And what we saw, it was interesting. You had two African Americans being pulled over by the police with two very dramatically different reactions, right? Mr. Wright lost his right. He was shot. Lieutenant Nazario was humiliated. He was maced. He was handcuffed. He was dragged to the ground, but he lived. And that is a dramatic...
Can I just point out one thing?
Sure.
What's up with the car stops?
Why are cops pointing guns at people who get for having an air freshener hanging from their windows or a temporary license plate?
This is what I mean about the trickling effect, the ripple effect of government overreach. When you have this many rules, you're going to have some bad confrontations. So we need to stop. You have
the police too involved in our lives to some degree and not exercising the discretion that they should. And you can't ignore the fact that this is happening to African Americans over and over again. The Lieutenant Nazario case was particularly disturbing when I saw the video, and that was the focal point of my perception or perspective until Dante Wright got shot for an air freshener. It's a tough situation we have. We'll be right back after a short break
with Ray Tierney.
Crime and Justice Radio is brought to you by the law firm of Barquette, Epstein, Kieran, Aldea, and Laturco, defending individuals accused of state and federal crimes, prosecuting the government for violations of your civil rights, fighting to overturn wrongful convictions, and seeking to make you whole if you've been injured in an accident. You can find them at www.barquetteepstein.com or call 516-745-1500. Barquette Epstein meets all your litigation needs from the Hudson to the Hamptons.
Welcome back to Crime and Justice Radio with Bruce Barquette. I'm Aida Leisenring, and with us today is
Mr. Ray Tierney, who's a candidate for district attorney in Suffolk County. Let's give a little background to that race if we can. He's running against Tim Tierney, who came in after Spoda's indictment. Remember Thomas Spoda, who was here to clean house after James Catterson was in office and kind of shown the door, supposedly going to usher out the old ways of Suffolk County. And Mr. Spoda's career ended, unfortunately for him, with an indictment in federal court. And then Mr. Tierney has come in, and in 4 years he's supposed to be ushering out the old ways again. Some say that he has just picked up where Mr. Spoda has left off, not with criminal acts, but with the old boys network, if you will. So Mr. Tierney is running for district attorney. We know him well. We've had cases together over the years. He was a Suffolk County assistant district attorney for a total of 13 years. Spent 2 years in private practice. Was an assistant United States attorney, federal prosecutor in the Eastern District of New York, right here in Central Islip, for 9 years. Prosecuted some of the biggest cases on Long Island. Ed Mangano, the county executive from Nassau County, ultimately convicted of corruption. Mr. Tierney was part of that team. He was part of the team that's indicted and prosecuted MS-13 members for some of the most horrific murders on Suffolk County. And he then went back to the state system, and he was a Kings County executive assistant district attorney in charge of the violent crime enterprise, crime strategies unit, and body-worn camera unit in Brooklyn for several years. Welcome, Ray. It's great to see you again. How's the campaign going?
Thanks, Bruce, and thanks, Aida. Thanks for having us. The campaign's going great. It's something that I'm not used to, but I'm getting used to.
So tell us, what's the top 3 reasons why Tierney needs to go?
Well, what I'll say is the top 3 reasons why I'm the better candidate. Number one, it's my experience, which is unique. I've been a prosecutor for 26 years, 24 of which were spent in Suffolk County, in both the state and federal system, where I tried massive Colombian cartel cases, white-collar cases, political corruption cases, MS-13 racketeering cases, child exploitation cases, computer crime cases, crimes against women, and every single courthouse in Suffolk County I have prosecuted cases in. I've prosecuted thousands of those cases in, and that makes me uniquely situated. Certainly, I'm the only person in this race who can say such a thing, and I think it makes me uniquely situated to say that I have the experience, the ethics, and the integrity to ensure that my assistants will fight every day for the health, safety, and welfare of all Suffolk County residents, not just the politically connected and not just the political donor class. I am a true political outsider. I am a prosecutor.
You said political donor class. One of the interesting parts of Tierney's campaign last time, and I think this time, is he won't take money from defense attorneys, but he's taking a significant amount of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, from the police. What's your view of that?
Well, I mean, I think that with regard to, I don't quite understand with regard to attorneys. You know, we are colleagues, and, you know, I don't hold myself above other attorneys. So I don't understand why you wouldn't take money from an attorney, but you'll take money from a Carter, or you'll take money from a political action committee. So that doesn't make any sense to me. And then when you talk about the money from the police, you know, first off, we have to find out. Mr. Tierney claims that he hasn't received any money. He claims that when people say you received $500,000, he denies that. And I don't quite understand how he could possibly deny that. So I think we need to hear from him. Did you get the money or not? Because right now he's claiming he hasn't.
If somebody says they spent it, and if he doesn't receive it, then there's...
Well, I mean, I think that's the, you know, did I receive it, or did I accept it, or was it used on my behalf? But that's what political action committees do. They spend that amount of money, in this case $450,000, in furtherance of a campaign.
Interesting.
Now, talk to us about crime stats, because as an outsider, I'm more of a New York City girl. I look at campaign ads and testimony and news articles about Timothy Tierney, and I think, oh my God, this man is an expert at eradicating MS-13. And I think his political campaign commercial even showed headlines from the media talking about his experience in prosecuting specific MS-13 cases. How would you compare your experience to his in that regard? Well,
I think there's two parts to that question, so I'll answer the first part with regard to crime statistics.
You're such a lawyer.
I am. I apologize.
And a good one.
It's annoying.
Compound question, counselor.
So with regard to crime statistics, I come from, you know, I worked in Brooklyn where I oversaw the crime strategies unit, and what they do there is they have, with the NYPD, they use CompStat, and they publish these index crimes, and it's on a biweekly basis, and it comes out and it's public. If you go on the internet right now, you could find out what the crime statistics were like in New York as of last week. No such thing in Suffolk County exists, and I believe when my opponent ran last term, he claimed that he was going to start such a unit. I am going to start such a unit because I think it brings transparency. There are going to be times when those statistics aren't going to be your friend, but it's something that's useful for law enforcement, and it's something that'll help the public to be better informed. So it's something that should be done.
And if you're the number one highest ranking law enforcement officer as a district attorney in Suffolk County, you would want to know what kinds of crimes actually are a problem.
Yes, and you could determine the types of crimes that are on the rise, the things that you're doing well about. What we did in Brooklyn is we laid out all the crimes, the shootings in particular, and so we mapped, we plotted those on a map. We plotted the housing projects, and then we also plotted out all the known gangs and their jurisdictions, the areas of Brooklyn that they controlled. And what you would see along those fault lines where the two gangs conflict with each other, that's where the crimes are. So if you plot this out, you can make a determination of where the crimes are occurring and how you could allocate resources.
Excellent, excellent. We'll be back after a short break. More with Mr. Tierney. Feel free to call in if you'd like, 631-451-1039, and we'll see if Mr. Tierney can handle a question or two from the citizens and the potential voters out there. We look forward to more of a discussion about this race. And by the way, Mr. Tierney, anytime you want, feel free to give us a call. You know our number. We'll be happy to have you on as well. It's going to be an interesting race this year, I think, for district attorney. I really do. We'll see what happens. More right after this.
Welcome back to Crime and Justice Radio with Bruce Barquette. I'm Aida Leisenring, and we return with Republican nominee Ray Tierney for Suffolk County DA. He could be your next Suffolk County District Attorney. And before break, I asked you a triple compound question. You called me out on it. I'd like to now pursue the second half of my three-tiered question.
Certainly.
MS-13 has been all the news for many years now with respect to Suffolk County. Former President Trump spoke about it, and Timothy Tierney in particularly has testified before a presidential commission on MS-13 in 2020, the Senate congressional hearing in 2019, and his website boasts that his office announced one of the largest takedowns of MS-13 gang members and associates in U.S. history, and his campaign, of course, featured ads showing headlines of Newsdays and other report of what he had done to eradicate MS-13. So what could you do better?
Well, I actually prosecuted MS-13. I went into the courtroom. I stared them in the face. I went through the entire process from start to finish, from extradition to arrest to arraignment to trial to pretrial hearings to post-trial hearings to appeal. We did that. I did that along with the other members of my team. Actually, it's kind of ironic because when he's talking about his accomplishments with MS-13 and cases are flashing, those are the cases that I personally prosecuted.
Wait a minute. He's run an ad recently boasting of his successes with MS-13. You mean the ad he's running with those people in that ad, that was your case that you actually prosecuted? In the last election, he had a commercial that had flashed the murder of Kayla Cuevas and Nisa Minkins. And it was the indictment of the individuals who did that. I put that case into the grand jury with an FBI agent. Wow. So you prosecuted it while he spoke about it, yes, is what you're saying. And I prosecuted the murderer of 19-year-old Vanessa Argueta and 2-year-old Diego Torres. In fact, with regard to that trial, it was two MS-13 members. They committed five homicides in 6 weeks. Now, the indictment that you're speaking of, there were no murders on that indictment. There were 90 or 96 MS-13 members. Not one individual was named in the press release. My MS-13 prosecutions are a matter of record. You could look at the cases, you could look at the defendants' names, you could look at the results. Life plus 60 years, life imprisonment. It's a matter of record. I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be a race that's going to surprise people. Mr. Tierney, Republican and conservative nominee, has done this for nearly 30 years, has been in the front lines of crime fighting in Suffolk County. I think Mr. Tierney's in for a much tougher race than he might suspect. Ray, can you talk a little bit about police relationships with the minority communities?
Certainly.
It's been obviously in the national news. We spoke about it here a little bit, and it'll continue to be. How would you address that as Suffolk County District Attorney?
Well, I think, first off, as Suffolk County District Attorney, you're the chief law enforcement authority in the county from a state perspective. And so what we did in Brooklyn is when we entered into these communities, we did takedowns. We stood behind our actions, and we had community outreach, and we went in as prosecutors and we explained what happened. We talked about the indictment, and if the community had any questions, if they had any concerns, we were there to address them. And I think that's something that's very important. You need to stand behind your actions. You need to stand behind your cases. And with regard to going into a community, an underserved community, a community where there might be not a complete trust of law enforcement, you need to go in after you and said, this is what we've done. So let's have a dialogue. Let's talk about it. And I could tell you that when we did that in Brooklyn, we didn't always agree with everyone in the crowd, but everyone in the crowd appreciated that we were there to speak with them, and they had the opportunity to at least voice their concerns to us.
Communication. We have a caller on the line.
Who knew? There's one person listening to us.
There's at least one person listening to us. County legislator, Robert Trotta, who I know best as Detective Robert Trotta. I met him somewhere along the line. Rob, welcome to the show. I understand you have a question or so for Mr. Tierney.
Yes, and I it's going to change the question slightly in the MS-13. I keep something on my desk to remind me of what type of politician I never want to be. And what that is a laminated copy of something Tim Tierney sent to my house. It says, "The man who took down MS-13." And the date is April 24th, I believe, 2017, and 3 weeks later, 4 people got hacked up in Central Islip. I can make a very strong argument that Tim Tierney was Jimmy Burke's boss at a time when he took myself and 2 other detectives out of the FBI Violent Crimes Task Force, 5 guys out of the DEA during a opiate epidemic, and 2 guys out of the ATF during a time when gun violence was out of control. And you know what Tim Tierney did? Nothing. For 18 months, he stood there and did nothing.
So what would you like to ask Mr. Tierney?
My question to you, Ray, is this. When he sent that mailer out, and that was your cases that you did, what were you feeling about that?
Well, listen, I was a career prosecutor, and what I cared about were the results. What I cared about were the victims, and I took care of myself. I kept what I did in the courtroom, and I can't worry about credit. All I can do is worry about results. And as DA, that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to tell you, with regard to that MS-13 program, the federal government does an excellent job. So when I become DA, what I'm going to do is I'm going to support them. I am not going to work at odds with them. I'm not going to battle them for headlines. I'm going to support them. I'm going to have a detective investigator embedded with them, and we are going to collaborate, and I'm going to support their mission because they're doing an excellent job, and they're taking the murderers off the street one after the other.
So let's change the subject a little bit and tell us who the Gilgo...
Who's responsible for the Gilgo Beach murders, all right?
Exactly.
That's what we really just wanted to ask you.
Well, I can say with regard to Gilgo, my personal involvement in Gilgo was about probably five years ago, and I never handled the case as a whole. Because of my relationship with people in Suffolk, because of my background, people would come to me with investigative leads. I would run those investigations down, and then I would support the other assistant U.S. attorneys who were working with the case. So, I think the problem with Gilgo is there's been a lot of grandstanding, and there's been a lot of law enforcement giving their opinions about what they think happened. And I think that's irresponsible. I haven't dealt with that case in 4-5 years, whatever it is. The investigation is continuing, and the investigation needs to play out. What I would say now is the good thing, what we have now is we have a historical case. Absent some monumental thing happening, like a witness coming forward, you're going to have to rely on what you have. And the good thing about technology is it's advancing. So there's advances in DNA, there's advances in phone work, and so you have to continue to work that evidence, and you have to refresh it, and you have to go back in time. And when if I was given the opportunity to look at that case again as DA, I would start anew. And the other thing that I would do is I would not shut anyone out. I think everyone, there was a lot of jurisdictional turf wars with regard to that, and that serves no purpose.
We have another minute or so with Mr. Tierney. Ray, I want to ask you about nursing homes and investigations of them and political donations of nursing homes, and get your kind of reaction to all of that.
Well, the first thing I would say is with regard to the nursing home disaster in this case, is it's pretty clear that that over 1,000 of our seniors died in Suffolk County because the management of those nursing homes were turned over to the lobbyists and the individuals who were benefiting from the response to COVID. And then there was a cover-up that followed. And what you need to do with regard to that is the Eastern District is investigating that. Why isn't there's 1,000 of our citizens who have died as a result of that? Why isn't there any state response to that? If I was the DA, I would follow the evidence, I would credit the victims, and I would follow that evidence wherever it led, whether it be to the governor's mansion or wherever.
Thanks, Ray. Can you hang around just for another minute or so after
Certainly.
the break? A couple more questions for you, and we'll be back shortly with Ray Tierney, who's a Republican and conservative candidate for district attorney in Suffolk County. Mr. Tierney, anytime you want, you can come on. We don't make political endorsements on this show. We simply invite, we hope, interesting guests involving crime and justice and discuss the issues. Thanks very much. We'll be back in a second.
Crime and Justice Radio is brought to you by the law firm of Parquette, Epstein, Kieran, Aldea, and Loturco, defending individuals accused of state and federal crimes, prosecuting the government for violations of your civil rights, fighting to overturn wrongful convictions, and seeking to make you whole if you've been injured in an accident. You can find them at www.barquetteepstein.com or call 516-745-1500. Barquette Epstein meets all your litigation needs from the Hudson to the Hamptons.
Welcome back to Crime and Justice Radio with Bruce Barquette. I'm Aida Leisenring, and we have Republican and conservative nominee for Suffolk County District Attorney's Office, Ray Tierney. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
May I call you Ray?
Certainly.
Even when you become the district attorney and I'm the defense lawyer in the room?
Absolutely.
So I actually have one question for you. And it's not, I don't want the campaign answer. I have spoken with you a few times, and what I recognize about you is that you have a tremendous amount of experience, but you don't love publicity. So it seems like you're a doer and you don't like all the attention. That's my gut. But my question to you is, and not the campaign answer, when did you wake up in the morning and decide, and why did you decide to run for Suffolk County District Attorney's Office?
Well, I never intended to run for Suffolk County District Attorney. I maintained my political. I thought it was more important to maintain my political independence throughout my career as a prosecutor. So that basically sealed, my fate as far as running for office. Because if you're not a member of a party, normally they don't ask you to run. So I guess because of unique circumstances, and I give the Republicans and the conservatives all the credit in the world, they reached out to me and they gave me this opportunity. And I thought about it. I looked upon my experience in Brooklyn, which was unbelievably positive. I thought that I affected the office in a positive way. And I think I could do that for this office in Suffolk County. And I think I could help the people of Suffolk County, and I could make that office, I could make people trust that office, I could change the culture of that office, I could change the politics as usual in that office.
one last thing. You and I both practiced in front of a federal judge who tragically lost her life in Florida over the weekend, Sandra Fierstein. I just want to give you an opportunity to speak to that for a moment.
Certainly. Devastating news. I think, it was shock when I heard. And I think sometimes when you think of judges, you think of their accomplishments, you think of their scholarship, you think of their office, and you don't think of them as human beings. And that was certainly the case with Judge Fierstein. I had the privilege of appearing before her. She was a wonderful jurist, and she was a nice. She was a nice person. She had a private life. She was enjoying that aspect of her private life, and she was tragically taken from her family and taken from the community, and it's just an absolute tragedy. And my heart goes out to certainly her family, also the entire Central Islip Courthouse community, because I know they're all hurting because that is a true community, and they all support each other. So just my condolences, and I was so sad to see it.
Ray, thanks very much for being our first guest. Hopefully you'll come back as the campaign moves on. But Ray Tierney, Suffolk County Republican and Conservative nominee for District Attorney. Races in November. We'll speak to him again, I hope. Thanks again for coming.
Thank you.
Best of luck to you.
Thank you, Aida. Thank you, Bruce.
Aida, I want to move from people who incarcerate individuals or who are intending to incarcerate individuals to the people who are actually incarcerated. And the New York Times ran a story over the weekend talking about the extraordinary rate of infection and death among inmates in jails and prisons across the country.
And not only was it higher than the general public, but it was, I think, at a rate 2 or 3 or 4 times more, which was astounding. And so far, according to the New York Times, at least 2,700 inmates have died from COVID. And I suspect that number is actually greater. And I say that because there are many people detained in smaller facilities where the numbers aren't necessarily reported or the media is not digging in. And the New York Times gave some examples in Fresno, which is pre-trial detention. So these individuals are locked up, they can't leave, and they're presumed innocent, and they haven't been actually found guilty. 3,800 of them were COVID positive. 4 out of 5 inmates infected in Ohio Pickaway Corrections. Immigration Detention Center in Virginia, nearly every single detainee there got COVID. So it's pretty alarming, and obviously it goes to show that the lack of medical care, the lack of the quite physical possibility of social distancing in jail, right?
Basic hygiene. Anybody who's ever been to a prison or jail knows the conditions are deplorable at best. Some of the prisons and jails around this metropolitan area are notorious. MCC, where Jeffrey Epstein hung himself, or actually hung himself. These places are, forgive me, but hellholes to begin with. And then you introduce COVID. And what I think the citizens don't understand is these people have gone, you talk about a lockdown in your house with your family. These people have been locked in a 8x4 cell with another individual, stranger, before they were locked in together. And for 14 months, no visits from their family, limited visits with their attorneys, limited recreation. And some of them are innocent. Some of them didn't do anything.
And not only that, but it's why I heard, and it hasn't been widely reported on, in St. Louis jail, inmates broke windows, set fires, and threw debris to the ground, demanding court dates. The pandemic has had an element of cruel and unusual punishment for inmates. First of all, let's just talk about the victims. There's been no justice for the victims of the crime. There has been no exonerations for those wrongfully accused and held without bail. There has been no right to a speedy trial for those awaiting charges without bail. And for those that are incarcerated and detained and can't get out because they either can't make bail or there is no bail, they don't have family visits. They don't have social visits. They have less recreational time. In many circumstances, they have little to no attorney visits, depending on the rules of the facility. So they can't even meaningfully discuss their cases with their lawyers. They don't have access to adequate cleaning supplies, to adequate medical treatment. And a lot of these inmates normally would have access to drug treatment programs, vocational courses, educational courses, and all of that has been shut down due to COVID. So they are literally sitting, watching the broken clock on the wall that stands still while they lose all hope and the will to stay the course.
It is really a tragic situation in the prisons and jails. If you haven't seen this New York Times piece, it was published Saturday. Take a look at it. The most conservative individuals among us should be shocked by how we're treating prisoners these days. One of the things that I want to do throughout this show is to highlight individuals who've been wrongly convicted. We're defense attorneys after all. And Aida, I think you have something from one person who persevered to the point of being exonerated.
So this is a thank you to a tweet by my friends at the Innocence Project. April is National Poetry Month, so I'm going to read you a poem from exoneree Mark Denny, who spent nearly 30 years in prison for a rape he didn't commit. And the poem is really telling for people that are not in prison or are in prison. Weathering the storm. Life is really what you make of it. It can be as beautiful as a botanical garden in springtime, as adventurous as Six Flags in the summertime, as breezy and leafy in the autumn's fall, or as bold and cold when eventually winter calls. Weathering a storm is the phase of them all. For this reason, our emotions, like oceans, rise and fall. Just pause and think, remembering your goal. By weathering the storm, you prove that your heart is as solid as gold.
30 years in prison for a crime that he did not commit. Individuals like that are languishing in our jails and prisons right now, waiting for their day in court or waiting for an appeal or hoping for something. Just hope at this point.
And Bruce, we're coming back next week, and who do we have?
We have a special guest, a African-American deputy police commissioner from Suffolk County, to talk about some of the issues hands-on, fresh from training police departments across the country, including in Ferguson, regarding racial bias. So we're looking forward to Deputy Commissioner Risco Lewis coming here to speak with us and to talk about more issues involving crime and justice. Aida, great job today. It's been fun. We'll see you again next week.
Next week, Monday at 6.
The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station, JVC Broadcasting Management, or its sponsors. Or its sponsors. Or its sponsors. Or its sponsors. Or its sponsors.